I'm Beverly Steele, and we're standing in the Oak Hill Cemetery, which is Roy O's present cemetery. We've been buried in this cemetery since 1926. That field that you see in front of us is where they wanted to put about 532 homes, actually, right in front of our cemetery. 3 houses per acre. They actually had permission to do 6 houses per acre. But this is what is happening here in our community with development that's coming through. And as I stand here in this spot in the cemetery, I'm looking at traffic passing on Interstate 75, where the property right next to that interstate is now industrial. And one of the trucking companies plan to come in and develop that property. It's so close to our cemetery. We're concerned about the trucks coming in and out on any particular day that they want to, days that we're having services, final services for our loved ones, and that just actually just disturbing the sweet process and the sweet service of us laying to rest our loved ones. This is a 400-acre parcel that you're looking at as far as your eye can span. And what we used to do on this property, there is a spring on this property that the state has designated as and called the Royal Spring, but we actually used to call it the sinkhole. When we were kids, we used to come down and have days and have picnics for the whole community and so forth. And then there's also another hole on here that they call it the mud hole. So in both of those holes, the community people would come and fish in those holes and get fish and take home to cook for their families and so forth. As well as this was property that many remember having tobacco planted on, and they would work in this field, in this particular field here. Now you can see that there's still some cattle here, agricultural, but this is piece now that has been turned to industrial. But before that, you can see the power lines, and under the power lines is actually the gas line for the state of Florida. So now this is what we're facing. This was a big agricultural field that we remember fondly in this community, interacting and having things done and so forth as community activities on this property.
Well, Raw should be reserved because our ancestors' blood, sweat, and tears is upon this land. They sweated, they struggled to save this land so they can pass it down through our generation. And now we are passing it down from, like my dad, he's in his 7th generation on the land where we live. So he got great-great-grand that gonna be able to come on and live on this land. So this is why we think Raw should be preserved, to save it for the ones that's coming on behind us.
It's an old community to us. I mean, we don't get the recognition that like Edenville or this new thing that come out in Alabama, but we was here too, you know. But we small, but we proud, you know. All the farming and stuff we did is gone.
My family had 80 acres. As you have in the paper there, if there were 2 brothers living in the house, they had 240 acres, which was 80.
My family, we both had 80 acres too.
Okay.
On the Dunlap side, which we call it Brooksville.
Okay.
See, we had 8 acres up there, and right across the street here, the Irvins. My grandmama, daddy, he had 8 acres right in there too. Well, I'm gonna tell you now, what's happening today, like I say, you got to get on board. See, you got, land ain't gonna do nothing but pay taxes if you don't do nothing with it or have nothing on it. We got that land reserved for our future. Doesn't come from our past. You want to go to your kids.
Intergenerational wealth.
Into the generation.
So when you say get on board, you mean we've got to
you got to
preserve it.
Yeah, and know what you're doing.
And know what we're doing.
You got to know what you're doing, because you don't, you're going to miss out. Somewhere you're going to fall through the crack. You're gonna fall through the crack and then you're gonna lose your land.
All those people from out of state,
Out of state.
they come in here and they the one controlling the whole county.
See, but us, we born here, raised here, worked here, and are gonna die here, and it's a big deal to us. But it's since you don't, you wasn't born here, you wasn't raised here, you don't live here, so you know it's just a money deal. It's just a money deal, you know.
Yeah.
Cause I get 4 or 5 calls all the time. Do I want to sell? See, do I want to sell? And then a lot of us sell.
The gentleman that came out and did the research, did the write-up in Rosewood.
Dr.
Okay.
Edward Gonzalez, tenant.
You know, he did a research and found out this was the only place that still have the same land that they give them the 40 acres and the mule. This land right here. This land right here. Yeah.
When we put out a call across the community for people to bring us in artifacts and different things that they may have had that depicted Royal's history, one of our residents walked in with one of the original deeds for some of the properties here in the community. Actually, it's not the original deed, it's one of the deeds from one of the original landowners, Delia Bryant. She was one of the only women that we can find in history in Royal that actually got a land grant in her name as a female, as an African American female, significant. Well, we did get one of her deeds that she deeded off some of the property to one of her sons. So what you're looking at and you're going to see is that original deed that was dated, I believe, in 1874, that she deeded off to her son, John Daniels, and this was gifted to our center. We're just blessed to have it.
She was a slave, and she came from Florence, South Carolina, in a wagon, and she was granted a mule and a plow. And she was successful in her and her children. They plowed 80.11 acres of land, not very far from here. Delia Bryan didn't have any education, but she had sense enough to go to Gainesville. At that time, that's where the White House was. And Delia Bryan met the President of the United States, and his name was Chester A. Arthur. And he signed the deed for the 80.11 acres. And Delia Bryan put her X on the deed.
Her land grant.
Her land grant, yes.
I was a tire,
Okay,
but before I tied the tobacco, you had to go in the fields and pick it.
okay.
So we went in the fields and pick it, and then you'll come back under this big oak tree on the wagon with sticks. And I wouldn't want to live nowhere else but in Royal. And when I came back home in 1974, I said, I come home to die, because I'm not going nowhere and live nowhere else but Royal. And when we have to write Wildwood, I just think about the little quotation marks, Royal. I love Royal. I ain't gonna live nowhere else but Royal. You could offer me $1 million to live somewhere. Guess what? I'm turning it down. I'm gonna stay right here in Royal.
I deeply, sincerely love Royal. The fact that that land belonged to our folks is now considered excludable is just not acceptable. It's unreasonable. So it should be included. Whatever the documents that the state and the government have that identify those areas that were designated for us need to be honored and recognized. That the folks who, or the people who currently have title or ownership to it, I don't think that their ownership extends to what the government precluded us from having, then allowed us to have, I think that should be honored. It's not right. A place like Royal lends a lot to the young folks as I was, to have an understanding and a connection to the land and an understanding and connection to history of how they got here. A lot of the young folks, and some people who aren't young, don't really have that connection to understand what it was like in the past. Now, I don't go back as far as my parents do and grandparents, but when we were here in Royal, we were down in South Florida, we had running water, we had electricity, and paved roads, mostly. Here, when we would come, there were no paved roads, there was no running water, and there was no electricity.
They had to pump
And no
water.
indoor plumbing.
Where we are now, this is the old slave cemetery. This was where they buried slaves from the old green plantation, which the history for Royal said that my people came from. And there was another plantation called the King Plantation, which eventually became Monarch Ranch. So this is where all of the slaves from those two plantations was buried. The youngest grave that we can find in this cemetery was actually in 1925. This is Oscar Anderson. That's the brother of my great-grandfather. And this one here is Reverend Lawrence Anderson. And that is the gravesite of my great-great-grandfather, as far as I can see in front of me. The highway dissected this sacred slave cemetery. The houses on the other side, as far as we can see, records show that that was the width and the breadth of this cemetery.